All right, excellent. Cool, well thanks for having me. We're going to dive into portfolio. A couple things come to mind. Number one is this is an hour presentation that I'm going to do in a half an hour. So we're going to buzz through some of the less pertinent topics and focus in on others. So if I'm buzzing through slides, bear with me. Number two, questions are always welcome, so feel free to ask questions along the way. Number three, I saw Michael's books up there. So one of them said a pragmatic something. I didn't see the whole title, but I saw pragmatic, and I really think I need to retitle my presentation as more of a pragmatic approach to portfolio for Jira. So Michael, thank you for the inspiration. Yes. Okay, so just a quick introduction. I'm Thad West, co-founder, recovering Java developer from ISO's Technology. Interesting story for us. We started in 2005 offering up enterprise Java consulting services. We bought the tools to do that. Had no idea that we were going to become solution partners. Kind of fast forward through all that, and today that's all we do. So we help teams deliver solutions using the tools. So what does that mean? We will help either operationally, we'll help train, we'll help extract business processes. So kind of that whole stack. We have teams of folks that help people to adopt the tools. And that's the sales pitch. So we buzzed through that pretty quick. Hopefully that was painless. Oh, last one, we were talking about this earlier. This is more relevant. You guys are kind of out of that DC area, but we are on the GSA Schedule 70 if anybody's here from the government and needs help. So I start with this presentation with kind of an active customer count, because a lot of times people don't come to this talk because they're excited about portfolio and it's working for them, right? They come to this because it's either new or they've hit a brick wall with it. So this gives you a little bit of idea that there are actually people out there using it successfully. So let's kind of set the stage with that first, that it's a product that's out there that's usable. Okay, so this is the presentation. We're going to go through this a little bit. The pitch, that's the part I'm going to gloss over. So it's really the promise that Portfolio does. It's why you've installed it as an add-on. And then we're going to talk about the reality. So after you've installed it and played around with it, we're going to talk about that reality. And then demo see it live, but we're also going to talk about that pragmatic approach of what we need to start doing today to make Portfolio work for us tomorrow. So. Okay, so this is where we're going to buzz through a little bit, but get through the idea that right now, when you're in Jira, you have teams. Teams are relatively autonomous and they're moving fast, right? They're churning through the organization. They can easily tell, hey, what's going on in my next sprint? What's going on in my next 2 sprints? They may even know what's going on in the next quarter. But at some point, somebody says, okay, well, I really need to understand what's going on in the next 18 months, right? Or I need to understand how all these teams interlink. So there's visibility as well. So the challenge is, how do we balance this autonomy of our teams moving fast along with the visibility that we want from an organizational or departmental level? I think our next speaker is talking a little bit about a framework that they're using to scale Agile. I think the dedicated Agile delivery framework. I think that's our next topic. So I'm not going to go into applying a methodology to the tools. What I'm going to show you is really how you can start to visualize these things without adopting a methodology. And really that's some of the point here. Okay, so just to set the stage, it doesn't have to be an organizational ask for Portfolio to be valuable. If you're on an individual team, you might get some of these visibility type questions, right? When can we deliver? What dates can I commit to? How do I avoid bottlenecks? What does our product roadmap look like? Individual teams have to answer these questions for themselves. So this is part of the promise of Portfolio, is it'll help you to understand these questions and answer them. When you start to talk about groups of teams, you might have to say, okay, well, I'm a department lead and I've got 5 development teams or 3 development teams working for me. What are they all working on, right? I don't care about the individual stories. I maybe care about the epics, but I really, I need a bigger view of what's going on there. Maybe there's dependencies, right? Maybe in our Teams in Space example, you'll see that, hey, there's a web team, there's a mobile team, there's a marketing team, right? How are those all interdependent and how do we release together? And what happens if Team C is late and Team B and Team A rely on it? What does that do to my schedule? And then we have the really big organizational questions is, I have all of these teams. At this level, I don't even care about epics, right? What I set out to do, I may have said what we're going to do in 2019, and I said it in such a way that, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, right? Not a lot of detail there, but I want to make sure that all my teams in the organization are kind of focused on X, Y, and Z, and how are we marching towards that. So this is the promise, right? How do we get all of that and we visualize it through portfolio? Does that kind of ring true for a lot of folks, and maybe why you're here is understanding those questions? Cool, okay. So the reality is, and I do this has anybody, hopefully not, but been to the emergency room lately? They have the Wong-Baker FACES scale, right? And it's meant for children to be able to point at and say, how much pain are you in right now, right? And it's a series of just faces they can relate to. So I like to talk about the typical portfolio journey kind of through that lens of where we're at. So we start with no pain, which is my team loves Jira. It's mission critical for what we do, right? We're humming away. But we need better visibility for all our teams. I think I'll solve this through boards, dashboards, and reporting. So I'll stay in the box and try to, if I can just craft the perfect JQL, maybe I can answer some of these questions, right? So there's work you got to do, hurts a little bit, but you understand how to do it. You're all pretty savvy in Jira. But what you end up realizing, well, that's not going to quite get me there. So you go out to Atlassian's website, you see, hey, I just saw this portfolio for Jira thing. It really looks like it's going to answer my question. I watched their 2-minute video. It does exactly what I want. I see these big Gantt chart looking things. It's awesome. Let's go do it. So I install it, I get my little 30-day trial, I create my first plan, but not really sure what I'm looking at. Like I push the buttons and I don't see my roadmap. We're still using Jira, it's still working for the team, but I'm not really seeing anything here. So then it's, okay, well I'm the Jira admin, there's documentation, I'm not stupid. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna read the documentation, right? I can figure this thing out. How hard can it be? And then it's, well, okay, this sucks. I don't really understand what's going on here. What else is available to me? So this is a very typical journey, and most of the times when I give this talk, everybody in the audience is ready to yell at me before I give this slide. It's like, they think that I'm gonna come in here and show them the magic, just how it works, and that's gonna, they don't wanna see a demo. They've already seen a demo, but how do I make it work for me? So that's the pragmatic approach that we're gonna talk through. So, here's how it works. We start with kind of a reset, and this is a reshifting of how you think about things. So step one, get Jira right first. So we do a lot of portfolio implementations, and about 80% of our time, 90% of our time, is spent working with clients on how to configure Jira and how they think about Jira in order for portfolio to actually be usable for them, right? Because Jira is so easy to configure. It's so easy to configure poorly. It's so easy to misconstrue kind of what you're supposed to be doing or how the portfolio team expects you to be doing things. So if you're doing them differently, but you're still delivering software, it's still working for you, that's great, but it's not going to really work for you in portfolio. Okay, so what do we do? So I think the first, let's get through these, is people really take liberty with what an epic is. And the reason is because that's all you have. That's the top level thing you have in Jira is the biggest container I have is an epic, so I'm gonna figure out how to make that biggest container make sense. And so that's when we have to reel back the conversation. Let's talk about what an epic really is and should be. Because portfolio is going to help us solve the problem of I have things bigger than an epic, so let's not cram things into an epic. So a lot of it's resetting and setting teams' expectations on how to use epics. Outcome-based description of featured deliverables, right? There is an end date, there's a start date. It is something that as a user I want to be able to, right? Or I want to be able to log in with my social media credentials, right? A story might be I want to be able to log in with my Facebook credentials, right? So it's really things that we can deliver on as a team. You don't have to tie it to versions. A lot of people get in the set like we're going to tie it to a version or we're going to tie it to a date on the calendar, like this is what we're going to do in the first quarter, right? So if you're doing all of that, it may be working for you now, but it's not going to work in portfolio, right? And the reason you're probably doing that is because you didn't have any other tools or mechanisms to do that otherwise without kind of hijacking the epic, right? This epic's going to Cuba, and we're all along for the ride. The other thing is how we think about estimates. So we can really start, when we start talking about features, we can estimate at the epic level, but then at some point, we're going to sit down with the team and we're going to break that down into stories, and we're going to really make that real, and we're going to take back our epic estimates, right? So the epic isn't estimated on its own. By the time we're ready to deliver some features on that epic, we're really talking about the stories, and that's where we should be estimating. Okay, and like I said, not just a container, but an achievable deliverable, right? So if you're using epics as some sort of container, it's not really going to work. Okay, boards. So one of the things that when you install your first portfolio plan, it asks you, hey, how do you want to import your Jira issues? Is it by boards? Is it by JQL? Is it by a filter? So you can do all sorts of things. Our best guidance is let's do it by a board, right? So a board is how the team operates today. So it doesn't have to be Scrum, it can be Kanban, but there should be a board that kind of reflects how the team is working today. And if your plan is made up of multiple teams, then we're just going to pull it at multiple boards, and we're going to let the teams figure out what issues are relevant for that board, and then we just pull those in, right? We don't want to reset and rewrite new logic for portfolio to figure out what issues matter. We want, the whole idea is that this is team-based. What is the team committing to? What are they driving on? And that's what my plan is going to represent. Okay, so we get those things done. I'm not going to talk about that one yet. So the next thing is issue links, right? Standard Jira concept, but without any teeth, right? So I can say issue A depends on issue B. Has no bearing on how I work in Jira today. There's no warning that I'm starting issue B before issue A. For us, it's just kind of noise. It's like, okay, you know, when you first install it, I love setting up all the links, and then you realize, well, the links don't mean crap, so I'm not going to do anything with them, right? They actually mean something in portfolio, so now it just, when you talk about issue A depends on issue B, it becomes a scheduling issue. It will not let issue A depends on issue B. Issue A will be scheduled after issue B, right? So now there's actually really teeth, and there's actually some visualization in it, which really helps out because you didn't have that in Jira. So start thinking about what your issues are, and again, they're just standard Jira issue links. Subtasks. So a lot of organizations we walk into, they show us all these great subtasks, and they want to talk about planning subtasks. And so that's when I would say you're doing it wrong. For me, the lowest thing we're going to plan and talk and care about are at the task level, stories, right? At that story task level. If, for example, we create a story and it has things that need to be done, sure, we can put logic in that says we can't close this story until that's done. But we're not going down and estimating individual subtasks. I don't really care. What we're talking about is at the task or story level. Yes?
I just wanted to, hi, I'm Michael. So I just wanted to ask you to just expand on that for a second about the subtasks, because in my user base, I see a lot of teams, they'll take a story and they'll subdivide that up into a bunch of subtasks, assign that out to maybe multiple people, and it always seems to strike me as not really the canonical model of Jira. And
Do you work in my company?
It seems like it invites more trouble than not. I'm just wondering how if you can maybe talk if you've seen companies do that, or projects or teams, whatever whatever organizational level you want to talk about, how you kind of pull them out of that.
Yeah, and I really take it back to that where I was talking about epics. So a lot of teams that do that are jammed in that position because in their minds they only have a 3-tier hierarchy. They have an epic, a story, and a subtask, and I'm going to maximize that, right? So I think the first thing I would do is let's take a step back, and we'll talk about in portfolio how we can make a more complex hierarchy that maybe matches reality. And then I would say the subtasks are for the individual person assigned the issue, right? If you as a developer or you as whoever's completing this task want to lay out it into a checklist, by all means, I love it, right? But I'm not going to dictate everybody works that way. I don't care. What I care about is our estimates accurate and that our progress logged is accurate.
So maybe you should talk for a moment, or maybe you will talk for a moment about sort of different estimating models, because that's also, it's a very arbitrary kind of a thing, and a lot of, it kind of gets into, because it's so arbitrary, people get into a lot of arbitrary discussions about
Yeah. I don't want to go too deep, but I will say that, so Portfolio allows you to, when you point it at boards, and for example, if you're doing a Scrum board, you'll talk about velocity. And my team might have 5 members, and I talk about my velocity as 100 story points.
Yeah.
This team might have 5 members, and they talk about their velocity as 20 story points, right? And so when you're really looking at a plan, you're expressing team velocity, and that's all it cares about, right? So yeah.
So related to the story points, some people do days and some people do points. I assume you're going to talk that you need to standardize.
Not in Portfolio, you don't have to. So the only thing you have to do, and this makes the Agile people squirm, but you have to do it, is when you pull this in, if you're having some people estimate in days or hours, and some people in story points, you need to give it a conversion of how many story points equals an hour or day, right? That Agile people hate that, but at the time, but somebody's already doing the math, right? Yeah, so you have to do it. So, all right, I'm gonna keep going. I got my half an hour. These are all great questions, by the way, and love to talk more about it. Versions and releases, again, this is something that people kind of hijack, or, I think Jira's done a much better job, probably in the last year or two, about how they kind of raising visibility. They have the release center, so getting people to think around this concept and get to do it. But this is one of those things where, are you consistent? Do you have a strategy? So this is one of those things you really want to think about on the team. And some teams are like, well, we don't really do it, and it's fine. But this is one of our really big ways that we control that timeline. So we can really say, we want these 100 things done, and we want them done in this kind of batch. This is our big kind of batch thing as we do it through versions and releases. So start thinking about doing that in your organization.
So I was looking at the cloud version, recent cloud versions, and new templates for projects. And they don't have versions and templates for projects.
Oh, really? I think they're always there. You just have to define them. You have to set your first version, and then everything lights up. So you have to kind of go through the admin interface.
When I copied something from I copied one of the templates from my local.
Yeah.
Up to the cloud, that worked, but all the versions that were on the cloud, the templates that were on the cloud, didn't give versions and didn't give components.
Yeah, versions and components are actually just data against the project. They're not part of like an issue scheme or anything like that. So you have to actually define them yourselves.
Portfolio for the management of those? Are they trying to push that?
No, it's.
Okay.
I think we need to talk about it a little bit offline because I think it doesn't quite work the way another template would. Okay, so we're working really hard to get Jira in a good spot, right? So step 2, we're gonna ignore the user interface, because what most people see when they see Jira, that's the thing they love the most in the video, is I want to see those diagrams. I want to work with this thing. I want to work with this Gantt chart. We're going to ignore that, right? So we're still working on the plumbing and getting organizationally understood how we're going to do this thing. So this is appealing, but we're not going to use it. I put this in here, but I think at a users group, everybody kind of understands the structure that's there. And the reason why I do that is, so what I want to talk about is when you install Portfolio, what are the other things you get, right? So before we do that, we have epics, we have stories. Don't worry about that little green box, my animation's off. And we have Jira users, right? So these are all out-of-the-box things that we have. Notice I didn't put subtasks in there. You know why? Because I don't care, right? They're not in there. Anybody who wants to use them, fine, use them. Okay. So the next thing I get is I get the concept of virtual users, right? So I get the ability to say, hey, I don't know who's going to do this, but I know a DBA is going to do it, and maybe I'm going to go hire that person, maybe they're going to join my team at this date, but they don't have to be a named Jira user. So I have the ability to model my planning around people that may or may not be in Jira yet. The other thing it brings in is the concept of teams. And you can kind of see there's other teams there. But it's kind of funny, so Atlassian, their ticker symbol is team, right? There's no concept of team in any of their products until you add Portfolio. So you can start defining teams, and that those teams can be made up of real users, virtual users, right? So you start to define these teams. Skills, if you install Portfolio and start using it, I would just, anytime you see this, I would walk away and not do it, right? So what it's trying to do is saying that, hey, an epic might take 10% of a project manager, might take 80% of a developer, might take 20% of somebody, and then you can start to say these people on my team have this skill, and it's all part of this auto-scheduling algorithm that just kind of doesn't work in reality, so that's the pragmatic part. I would punt on all that because the reality is when your frontline people, project team leads are doing things, they already know who's going to do these things. I would just assign it to those people, and then you bypass this whole skills thing, right? If you're an organization that has a giant pool of people and a giant pool of projects and you're trying to mix them together, maybe, but that's still a disaster too. We should talk if that's what you're trying to do. And then, so now we start to add this level initiative above it, and I say initiative plus plus because we can add layers higher than an initiative, right? So we can start to define a hierarchy that makes sense. And people are like, well, what's an initiative? It's a Jira issue type, right? So there's nothing, people get all weirded out like, hey, portfolio is doing all this stuff. It's like, it's just using Jira things and linking them together, right?
What does that become after initiative? Does it just become initiative and then a higher initiative and a higher
Whatever you want to call it.
You can call it whatever
You can call it whatever
you want.
you want. You don't even have to call it an initiative.
So you make like a new issue type and then you just name it. You can name it feature or you can name it component.
Yeah.
Whatever, but it is what it is for the instance. So everyone's sharing that instance.
That is a good point. It is globally, so organizationally, like words matter, and you gotta figure out what words you're gonna use. You can overload it with different issue types, but when you look at the tool, there's also a mapping in the tool of this level can be called an initiative. I could call it a project. I could call it whatever I wanted. That's the one that's one for one, but I could overload it with 5 different issue types.
Does initiative look any different than an epic, or are they pretty similar and you can just continuously make larger versions of it?
So that's an interesting question. So Epic gets a lot of special syntactical sugar in Jira, right? So I go to a board and an Epic's called out and I get all that stuff. I can overload the concept of Epic. I don't get any of that visual kind of sugar, right? What I do get is if I drill into the issue, I can see parent link, I can see who's up there, and I can see the children link, much like an Epic, but I don't get any special treatment on agile boards, right? The special treatment really comes in portfolio and a little bit of clues while I'm looking at the issue. And then all of that concept is wrapped into a plan. So think of a plan like an agile board, right? We can spin these things up as often as we want. Much like an agile board, you should have one agile board that runs your project. You can have an issue that lives on 15 agile boards, but the rank is global, so when you drag something around on one agile board, it's going to affect all 14 other boards, right? So it's the same sort of concept. Your plan is, go spin up your own plans. I don't care, but this is the plan we're operating off of. You can play around, do your what ifs, but don't commit stuff back, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then bigger than a plan is a program, right? So this is one of those things that I would call kind of proof of life for Atlassian, right? There's not a lot I can do in a program right now except visualize, but what they do see is that, hey, maybe I have different departments, but I want to see across many departments how their plans come together in a program. And it's a very effective tool, but it's really not a working model tool that I would sit and play and do my daily job in. I'm really focused in on a plan and doing my job.
I won't derail you too hard. I've never seen a program. It's in portfolio somewhere?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Is it only on server?
No, it should be in cloud too. Like I said, it's kind of proof of life. It's fairly new.
Oh, is it a labs feature?
No.
Nope.
It's,
No way.
Does program connect multiple different
I'll search.
projects, or is
well,
it-
remember, so our plans are going to pull things together from boards if we're doing our best practice, and boards are going to define n number of projects they're pulling from. And so program is just wrapping together many plans, right? So project linking really happens at the plan level.
So your program can be cross-project.
Oh yeah, your plan can be cross-project.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just it visualized another way as a more kind of standard hierarchy. But what I think is important here is, first of all, we can overload traditionally what we called an epic. So these are just general Jira, or oh, I shouldn't be pointing. Sorry, Riley. So these are just general issue types, but in portfolio I've configured them to be peers of epics, right? Again, with that caveat that I don't get that special visualization on agile boards, but I do get some behavior out of that. And then same thing goes for everything else, right? So I say, well, what's at the top level? Well, we have a thing called an SOW. That's just an issue type called an SOW. I have a thing called an initiative and a thing called an event, right? That was my little contrived one for a marketing example, but how you might do a marketing layout in this as well. So yeah, and I reluctantly put Subtask on there. So what we're going to do is, the other piece is, okay, great, there's a Teams interface. We're going to create shared teams. So there's a concept of, I can create a team and bind it to a plan, and it's only visible in that plan. And that might be good for playing around, but generally there's a different interface for creating a shared team. So a shared team is just basically anybody in the organization can see this team and use it in their plan. That's good and bad. If you're in a large organization, anybody in the organization can see and use that team. May or may not be what you want. But at the bare minimum, it becomes JQLable. So we can say this team is assigned to this issue, right? I can create Jira dashboards around that. I can create JQL around that. I can say, hey, what are everything that this team is assigned to? So it just gives me a custom field that I can pop on a Jira issue that actually has meaning now. Okay. So think about Portfolio for Jira like you think about Agile boards. So I already kind of touched on this. Agile boards, we visualize the workflow. In Portfolio for Jira, we're trying to visualize the delivery schedule, right? So if you stare at an Agile board, it's not going to tell you when you're going to be done with your next release. It takes guesses, like, hey, it'll say, based on this velocity, maybe you'll be done then. But Portfolio for Jira is really that visualization of our delivery schedule. You visualize versions and releases in Agile boards. You can also do that in Portfolio for Jira. And then the Agile boards let you see that epic story, subtask relationship. In Portfolio for Jira, it lets you see that whole hierarchy. And it lets you see it more like a kind of old school Outlook mail style, right, where it's kind of a plus and you see things below it. It's actually very useful. So we'll take a, if we have time, kind of running out of time. So this is another thing that's really nice. So why did I get to that one? Let me just make sure. Okay, so one point is, I remember when Greenhopper then became Jira Software, like it's made several transitions, but people used to get freaked out by Agile boards. They'd be like, hey, if I move my issue on this board, what happens in Jira? And it's like, what is Jira, right? So don't worry about it. So, I think enough times passed, people are comfortable with it. It's just a visualization. In Portfolio for Jira, that's generally true, but there's one kind of cool exception, which is in Jira, as the team's working through their issues, what's displayed in your portfolio plan is always up to date. But as I am a planner and I'm trying to figure out, and maybe I'm thinking I'm going to hire people, maybe my boss just came and put something on my desk and said, hey, we got this crazy new initiative, tell me how it's going to get done, right? I want to start laying things out in my plan and thinking about them in a way that doesn't impact how people are. I don't want people to see that noise. So I can make all sorts of changes in Portfolio for Jira, and the work is to commit them back, right? So every change I make gets queued up into a queue. You'll see a little change counter in there that says, hey, you've made 52 changes. You can see what each one of them is. You can search on them if you want to. But basically it is, I see these issues and I either want to commit them back to Jira or I just want to roll them back. I was just playing, right? So it's a very useful feature from that point. So what it thinks, new issues, sprints, assignees, versions, releases, issues, dependencies. So as you're setting these things up in Jira, there's also, I need to update the slide, there's some dates that come across now too. So they've bubbled up some dates, bubbled down, pushed some dates back into Jira that have come out of Portfolio. So there's some dates that actually get pushed across too. Every time I give this presentation, I talk about updating the slide and I never do, which kind of sucks. Okay. The other thing I really, really love about Portfolio for Jira, and this is where I'm going to do just a quick little demo, is, again, we're going to, I blocked it out, we're going to ignore this top thing, right? We're going to ignore what is up there. And what I would say is, don't worry about anything you're seeing here, but it's not too, oops, it's not too complex, but we can get into that later. But I'm looking at it at an initiative level, and so what I can see here is I can start to see, you know, hey, here are the epic level items below the initiative. Maybe I want to add some more. Let me do this. Oh, I don't know how to do this in Windows. I suck. Okay. Let's say I want to add some more peers to this, right? So if I say, okay, well, there's children to this. So you'll notice I'm adding a child. It knows kind of what my children are here. I can say, as a user, blah, because I'm writing really good stuff. I can start targeting releases. I can start to estimate. I can do all of these things. The first thing you'll notice is there's this kind of little orange brick here. All these have issue numbers. This doesn't. What I can do is I can commit those back, but I got to get out of this row first. Let's do that. So I have my one uncommitted change, which is a new issue. Not out in Jira yet, but I'm still just kind of playing around and exploring. This is the one thing that I really dislike, and they said they're going to fix this in version 3 is coming out. I got a little demo of it. But if I wanted to add a peer, I have to hover over the exact line. Jira Cloud has that. Oh, Jira Cloud does have that? It has version 3? Yeah. I've been using that. Oh, good. Well, and I can't even seem to hit it, but you'll notice when I click this plus button, I got a child. To create a peer, you have to hover over the exact right line, and then a plus icon appears, right? So that's very frustrating. But what I love about this interface is that I can sit in a team meeting, and I can say, look, boss just gave me this new initiative. Let's sit down and talk about the epics team, right? We're not going to go down the story level, but let's sit and talk about the epics. And I can just buzz through here like a spreadsheet and not be hitting create, and then polluting my Jira instance with all of these things that we may or may not be doing because we're just kind of working on ideas. I can create. I can fill out, I can add custom columns here. I can bring in custom fields. I can start to fill out the data that's relative to me without hitting 17 different create and next and all of that buttons. I can just do it kind of spreadsheet entry. And that's one of my favorite things to do is it's really easy to sit in a meeting and start to collaborate on what should be Jira tasks. Okay, I know I'm kind of getting tight on time.
Question here.
Yes.
So the highest one you have there is initiative?
The highest point I have is initiative.
Okay.
So initiative, epic level, story level.
How do the programs come together?
How?
The plan into the program?
Oh, yeah, so that's in portfolio. I may have, hold on, if we go into view portfolio, so I have a program called Team Travel Department, right? I can create a new program up here or plan if I want, but so that's how they kind of get rolled up. Yep. Cool. All right. Finishing up. So embrace, so this is the last step. We've got everything the way we want, and now the documentation isn't great because it doesn't tell you all of the things you need to do in Jira to do it. It just assumes everything's right. And then it starts talking about, hey, this is what this means. This is what that means, right? This is where, okay, now I want to make sense of the user interface. This is the documentation that's really good. So that link out there, I'll give a copy of the slides. You guys can go click on that. But all of the next 2 slides are on one page. It walks you through everything that you're seeing here. So for example, one is current day today. What's trailing? If we look at bullet point 6 there, bullet point 6 is where we're actually going to release iOS 1.0 based on the amount of work we have in the queue. Bullet point 9 is where we committed to release, right? So now we know we have a lot more capacity to make that release date if we want to. Bullets 5 and 4 are the opposite, right? We committed on 5 to that date. We have so much work in the queue that we're actually going to hit 4, right? So it's data dense, but once you start to understand how to read it, there's a lot of good information there that will help you make decisions and articulate information out. So same piece here. This is a slightly different view. It's called target view, target version view. I have to look at it. But basically, you'll notice this is where we start to see slippage in schedule, right? So if we set target dates and say, hey, this is when we think things are going to start, we can start to see those commitments slide. So for example, if you look at that line, I don't want to point at it, but this line, plat 2, right? We can see we originally planned to start it here and end it here. This is how much it slid based on all the information coming in from Jira and what we've told about priority, availability of team members. So this is us watching our plan start to fall apart, right? And maybe start to replan is what we want to do. Okay, so this is, I think, wrapping it up. Too long, didn't read. It really, really highly depends on how your Jira is configured for it to be effective. If you're frustrated and you're not seeing anything or seeing what you expect, you know, I'd take a step back and say, okay, how are we doing things in Jira, and do they map to the concepts here? Portfolio for Jira visualizes your issues, the relationship. So a lot of people say Portfolio for Jira is doing things. It's just visualizing, right? Just get in your head, it's not doing things, it's just visualizing what you've told it about your Jira config. We've set project release dates. We've set version dates. We've set epics to be a certain thing, right? So it's just visualizing that information that it knows. Okay, and we're gonna have to skip that demo. I did put this out here I hate ending on a sour note, but this is the reality. If everybody got this email, the only thing I wanted to say was you can beat the system a little bit. If you are coming up for a renewal anytime soon, you can lock in a 3-year renewal on the server platform at today's prices versus the effective date of their price increase. We have a blog out there. It's called the Price Increase Sandwich. Good news, all the Atlassian investments. Hopefully you're seeing that in products. You're seeing that in acquisitions and expansion of the stack. Bad news, price increase. Good news, you can game the system a little bit and lock in today's prices.
Is this all of Jira, or is this just the plugin?
This is Atlassian products. So add-on vendors do what they want. That's it. Hopefully that was half an hour. Was that half an hour? Ish? All right. Cool. And I'll be around, happy to answer questions. Yeah?
You had mentioned that it depends on how your Jira is set up. So I have some pretty unique workflows. Is there anything on a workflow basis that you think would potentially interfere with the interaction with portfolio? Or do you feel that it's more related to issue types and hierarchy?
The only thing that would throw it is when we talk about boards, one of those key concepts is what is the last column? How do you get to done, right? So if you've got if your workflow has like 7 things that mean done, it's done here, done there, that would be confusing, right? And so it wouldn't work well with that. But if done means we're done, then you're good. I think that would be the only thing that would trip it up. Cool. All right, I'm gonna have a beer.